This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Sean Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Tuesday. How's everybody doing today? Well, before I get on to the episode sponsors today, I should point out this is a two-part interview. I had Francis on in the morning and Tom coming on right after, and so we just blended them together. Francis stuck around for the second hour, so I hope that's clear in when they kind of get blended together at the end of the first hour. But we put them together. Don't normally do that, but today the conversation kind of led from one into the next. So you can expect it's a 2-hour conversation, but 2 parts. The first part with just Francis, the second part with Francis and Tom Flanagan. But okay, how about we start here? Did you know it's Christmas season, folks? So stocking stuffers, look to Silver Gold Bull and Prophet River. Those two here, I think, would be great stocking stuffers. But did you know you can hold physical gold and silver in your registered accounts? Silver Gold Bull can help you unlock the potential of your RRSP, TFSA, RRIF, or KIDS RESP by adding physical gold and silver to your account. This year's deadline for making contributions into your RRSP is March 2nd, 2026. But once the contribution is made, you can invest in a physical precious metal at any time. And Silver Gold Bull is a company I would recommend if you're interested in precious metals, as they can help you with their in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, or storing precious metals. You can text or email Graham for details with any questions you have around investing in precious metals and for feature silver deals exclusively offered for SNP listeners. Just go down the show notes. All the contact details are sitting there. Prophet River, yeah, a good stocking stuffer. Go look at ProfitRiver.com. They got lots of different things that could go in a stocking, and you can hop on their website. You can also email Joel at snp@profitriver.com. Any purchases you're making, whether it be via the website or in person over the phone, just make sure to drop coupon code SNP. That gets you put in for monthly draws. And if you go to ProfitRiver.com, it's all there. They are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories, and they serve all of Canada. So it doesn't matter if you're on the west, the east, or up north. If you're looking for firearms, head to ProfitRiver.com. RecTech Power Products, for the past 20 years, they've been committed to excellence in the power sports industry, and they're a whole lot more than just ATVs or snowmobiles. If you head into their location on the west side of Lloydminster, they got a beautiful showroom, full stop. They're open Monday through Saturday. They got Alberta-built aluminum trailers. They got boats, Lund fishing boats. I know it's not the season now, as it's dipping closer to -20 and the lakes are all frozen. But they got a whole host of different things in there, from side by sides, ATVs, boats, Sea-Doos. Why am I spacing on it? Pontoon boats. Man, that word always escapes me when I'm talking about RecTech. But if you stop into their showroom, there is a lot there. And you tell Ryan and the crew there that Sean sent you. You can also visit them at rectechpowerproducts.com. PlanetCom, when you're busy running a growing business, trying to stay on top of the ever-changing world of information tech can be overwhelming, to say the least. And they want to take care of that for you, leaving you to do your thing while they do theirs. For over 22 years, PlanetCom has been here to boost your productivity by proactively managing every aspect of your IT infrastructure, both in the house and in the cloud, and this ensures you're not too tangled up in tech to get anything done. You can check out the Sean Newman Podcast website.com to see their handiwork, or you can go to planetcom.ca to see everything they're dealing with everything going on online, all the scams, of the security side of things. You need somebody looking out for your best interests, and PlanetCom has done that for myself, and they can do it for you as well. The Mashpeel is happening January 17th in Kalmar, just west of Leduc. And if you want to be an individual, you can sign up as just a person, or you can come as a team of 4. And some people are going to be there: Chuck Prodnick, Jamie Sinclair, Willie McDonald, Eva Chipiak, Marty up north, Twos, myself. It's going to be a fun day, and if you're interested in that, it's down in the show notes. The other thing, Cornerstone Forum, March 28th at the Westin Calgary Airport. Yes, we're back, and early bird tickets. I probably can't say this enough. Early bird tickets are on until December 31st, then the price goes up. So if you're looking to attend, don't wait. Buy today. Get your tickets, and then also hit up the hotel booking link is on the website, showpass.com/cornerstone26. It's all down in the show notes as well. And there's a complimentary ticket for the Friday night social for anyone attending and purchasing a Cornerstone ticket. So that is going to be a fun day in March. Hope to see you there. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, Substack, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. And if you're enjoying the show, share with a friend. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. First guest for today is a former associate professor at Mount Royal University and author. The second, a former professor at University of Calgary, former advisor to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and author. I'm talking about Francis Widdowson and Tom Flanagan. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Sean Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Francis Widdowson. Francis, thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for having me on your program.
Well, I tell you what, it's been a while. I got to go back to, what is it? Episode here. I had it right up, and then, of course, it
2023.
Yeah, episode 390. So people got to go way, way back. I was getting texts, you should have Francis on. This was probably a year ago. And I'm like, oh, I had Francis on. But it's funny, we're into the 960s now. So it's been, you've been a busy lady. And on this side, we haven't stopped talking to people either. Now, Francis, every time I see something, you're getting arrested, you're getting, surrounded by people, and you're in the heart of a giant, I don't know, is it argument, discussion, whatever you want to call it. Walk us through what's been going on here in the last, I don't know, it's been a couple of years, but certainly in the last couple months, it's really hit a fever pitch.
Yes. I was trying to go and give talks at universities. That was last year. And it worked in Ontario at Brock University and Wilfrid Laurier. And then with University of Regina, that was the beginning of the cancellations. Lethbridge, of course, was the first one. But anyway, so you try to get a professor to book you talks, and then they cancel you. And then it seems like, okay, well, we've lost this battle. But then I discovered a way to get around that, which is to go in with the Spectrum Street epistemology, which is these mats. It's a method developed by Peter Boghossian, who you have 7 mats from strongly agree to strongly disagree and neutral and you have a claim. For example, the remains of 215 children have been confirmed at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. That's the claim. And you ask people how certain, or do they strongly agree with that? And if they say yes, they stand on the strongly agree mat, and you say, what evidence do you have to support that view? And then what evidence would you need to become less certain? So you don't need to book any space. You just go in to do this method. And you can do it anywhere. You can do it, and you can do it outside is the best, because then you're not using their internal facilities and so on. And you're just there as an ordinary citizen having a discussion, academic discussion. So now the universities can't have that. So first of all, they issued trespass notices. And then I would disobey. I would just say, I'm not going. I'm going to stay here and do this. And you do whatever you have to do. And so then the universities kind of stood back and didn't know what to do about that. So they let it happen. And then there was a great discussion that would happen. And then UVic, they finally pulled out the enough of that. And they arrested me. I said, I'm not going. They gave me the trespass notice. I said, I'm not going. They arrested me. So now I'm going to go in and just keep on doing it and see which universities are going to do what in terms of this response to this.
So eyes wide open, you're like, you knew you were going to get arrested at some point.
I didn't know. I didn't think they would. I really did not think they would arrest me, because I thought there's no way this university is going to arrest me, because now they're going to have to talk about their ridiculous propaganda that they have been pushing on students for the last 4.5 years. And that's what's going to happen. And and that they are a complete totalitarian environment and will not allow faculty members or students to oppose the official line that they have taken, which is that 215 children are buried in the apple orchard at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, something which has no evidence for it and is also a highly improbable situation because not one parent has said that their child went missing from the Kamloops Indian Residential School.
You know, in the videos I was watching, I watched a healthy dose of Winnipeg, and there was actually at times you were having some discussion. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then as soon as that started, like mayhem would break out, and you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, and they just full stop. Anytime any conversation began, they got in the way to make sure it couldn't happen. Is that am I misinterpreting what went on in Winnipeg or elsewhere for that matter?
Winnipeg, my cameraman was pushed off campus. Daniel Page, who is a computer scientist, he's a professor as well, who's had terrible academic freedom problems. He feared for his life that day because these gangsters, it was a very manipulative situation by a bunch of female activists who I will call cry bullies, unbelievable cry bullies who assault you, pour drinks over your head, taunt you endlessly, and then claim they're the victims. This is what they're doing. And they bring their gangster friends with them. And so if any man tries to help you as they're assaulting you, they will scream, they will do their cry bully thing, and the gangsters will come and start to attack the men who are trying to help you. And that's what happened at the University of Winnipeg. We have 3.5 hours of footage from that day, which is absolutely shocking. And APTN just did a program where we got new shots of the horrible assault that I had to endure, which I just took it. I just completely took it. I'm lucky I didn't get kicked in the head because I lay down and told them I was going to take a nap while they calmed down. Like I wasn't really taking the situation very seriously, but I could have gotten seriously hurt, obviously. But nothing happened to me. I got a sticky drink poured on my head, but I just told them I thought they were deranged. I'm going to just wait until you guys calm down, and then we'll do the Spectrum Street epistemology. And then eventually they had to go pick their kids up from daycare, so they all left with their gangster friends, and we did the street epistemology session. But then after we did it, Daniel, my sound system got water poured on it, and then Daniel got punched in the face. So it wasn't over even after we were able to withstand this just unbelievable assault for over 3 hours. And the police were called by 6 different people, and they never showed up.
If I go back to our first conversation, we were talking about Lethbridge back then. And I look at you and I go, you're no stranger to having people opposed to the views you're trying to talk about, the things you're trying to talk about. But maybe just I'm adding this up wrong, but to me it looks like it's escalated from then, right? It was before, it was like not, I don't know if you could call it a peaceful crowd, but the videos I watched of Lethbridge, and you can certainly add in anything I'm missing. At the time, there was no drinks being poured over your head. There was no like huddle around you, swatting cameras away, getting right in your face, calling you, I don't know, a lot. And now it just seems, and to the point of being arrested, it just seems like there's this escalation happening on Canadian campuses right now.
Well, at the University of Lethbridge, there was a little bit of jostling. Security was alarmed because of the number of people. One Indigenous woman, and she was actually authentic. The other ones were just performative. But she was screaming at me, telling me that she hated me because I stole her land. But I don't see, if people scream at me or call me names, I do not care at all, because I see it as a tactic, that they're just avoiding the actual merits of the discussion. But because that's not working against me, it won't stop me. In fact, it makes me more determined to go in there and to just fight this. Now there's violence that is starting to be put out. That happened at Victoria too. There was assaults, and my boards got stolen, and the police were there. Well, they arrested me immediately. I wasn't there. I gave my boards to Jim McMurtry, and then this guy Logan Stats came and tore them up like a wild animal. It was absolutely deranged. And the police, they tried to get the boards back, and two protesters told the police, "Where do you think you're going? And don't advance any further," to the police officer who was trying to get my boards back. So the police do not have control over this situation, and it's going to get worse. People have got to take this very, very seriously. We are heading down a totalitarian path, and if you don't allow people to discuss things, violence is going to be what happens. Like discussion is what stops people from becoming violent, and because they're stopping the discussion, violence is what is going to be the result of what is going on. And this is just totally unacceptable. And these universities are just absolute propaganda factories, and they need to stop doing what they're doing. But because the whole system is breaking down, it's hard to get it to right the ship.
Well, the start of the University of Winnipeg, the 3+ hours of it, it's protesters video showing up and what they're talking about you. They don't know your name or anything. Like they're showing up because you deny residential schools that existed. That's one of the first things I wrote down. I'm like, but I don't think I've ever heard you say that, but maybe you could clear the air on this of actually what you're trying to discuss, because there's this I don't know. Anyone who's listened to you talk goes, that's not what I'm talking about, but maybe you could address that.
Well, the claim that I am denying, if we're going to use the word denying, is that the remains of 215 children have been found in the apple orchard at Kamloops. That's the claim now that I am denying. The other thing that I'm denying is that the residential schools were genocidal. That's the second claim. The two are related because the claim about the 215 remains being confirmed, which the Kamloops Indian Band announced in May 2021, was used to get the public to think that maybe there is something to this genocide kind of claim. Because before we had the Kamloops quote unquote discovery, we had the Truth and Reconciliation's argument about cultural genocide, which is not genocide. Cultural genocide is assimilation. And you might be opposed to that and think that was a wrong-headed policy. But at the time, we didn't think that cultural genocide was actual genocide, which was the intent to destroy a group through physical destruction. And cultural genocide was never included within the UN definition of genocide. So this is a debate, like we just kind of missed that discussion about whether cultural genocide was genocide, because everyone now has just kind of accepted the fact that 215 children were supposedly murdered and put in clandestine graves at Kamloops without having any evidence for that. And I'm trying to get people to understand that that was a deception that was perpetrated against the Canadian public by the Aboriginal industry, which is this group of lawyers and consultants and neo-tribal elites who are making money off of all these kinds of grievances that they are stoking, which they did in this case.
Well, if we go to, here's a couple things. The other thing I was going to say that I'd written down right at the start of that video is they wanted a bill in Manitoba to create a bill against or for hate speech against First Nations. I'm probably saying that backwards. And I'm like, that's a scary thought too, to not, because, like I'm a firm believer in open dialogue, open discussion. Let's discuss these ideas, right? If Frances is as crazy as they say they are, then I think it'll probably come out. And if she isn't, then there's probably a few merits to what she's talking about. But they're talking about creating a bill for hate speech. And I mean, this is, once again, this goes to the federal government and everywhere, talking about these online censorship bills and trying to get rid of dialogue.
Yes, and this is the bill. So it's Leah Gazan, who's a Winnipeg MP, She has been trying to do this for a number of years. She didn't get the last one she tried, just died because of the election, and now she's at it again. And this is to make what is called residential school denialism, which no one, well, they say it's about distorting facts and impeding reconciliation through this distortion of facts, but they're the ones who are distorting facts. Leah Gazan said in January 2025 that bodies of children had been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, 215 bodies. So they're accusing people of doing what they're actually doing, and then they want to have the factually accurate position criminalized because of their political view that you should agree with everything that what's called a survivor says happened. And of course, the language survivor should not be accepted at all by people. It's using genocide survivor language. So we're being trapped because we're being given all this language which is not accurate. And once you accept this language, you're kind of stuck in this assumption. George Orwell alerted us to this, 70 years ago. This is a problem, the politics of the English language, where there's distorted words that you're given and then you use them and then you've lost the argument before you start because your words are not correct.
Kamloops, 215. What are the things you're trying to bring up to people about Kamloops? You point to it over and over in the video. They're yelling at you that they're not in Kamloops. It's Winnipeg. Why are you coming to Kamloops? You're like, because it all starts with Kamloops, and you're trying to explain. What are you trying to get across about Kamloops?
I'm trying to get across that there's no evidence for the claim that 215 children are buried in the apple orchard. That's my main point. But my specific point, and this is that Kamloops is the main card in the house of cards, and so people are fighting hard to maintain this deception, because if they let that go and people realize what's happened over the last 4.5 years, they're going to start questioning a whole bunch of other claims that have been being made. So that's kind of the specific claim. But the more general claim is, at universities, it's very important to base your beliefs on reason, logic, and evidence. And this is what we used to work on at universities. And this is completely gone. It's over, because universities are now propagandistic institutions that are insisting people accept the views of these activists. And that's the more alarming kind of thing that's happened. Like, the Kamloops case seems like a minor thing, but it actually is a major thing, because if we can't have the truth about Kamloops, we can't pursue the truth about anything at the university. Like, that's kind of the situation.
When you first heard about Kamloops and you started looking into it, what did the evidence tell you? Or what did it show?
So interestingly, I organized an event on July 10th, 2021. So that was about a month and a half after and this was before Sarah Bollier gave her presentation on July 15th. So I was the first person to raise the alarm publicly about this situation. And I organized an event with Rodney Clifton, Brian Giesbrecht, with Paul Viminitz, a professor from the University of Lethbridge, as the moderator. Rodney Clifton is a professor emeritus from the University of Manitoba. Brian Giesbrecht is a judge who's been involved with Aboriginal policy for decades. Anyway, I've been sort of seeing deception happening with respect to the residential schools. I've been studying it for a number of years. So when I heard what had happened at Kamloops, I was very cautious about what actually that was. And Brian Giesbrecht was saying on this event, there's a whole bunch of abandoned cemeteries across the country, so it's possible that Kamloops is an abandoned cemetery. So that was the first thing. Is it an abandoned cemetery or is it clandestine burials? But then we found out that that wasn't a cemetery. There is actually a cemetery across from the Catholic Church on the Kamloops Reserve, on the Kamloops Indian Band Reserve. So any bodies that are buried legitimately would be buried on the Kamloops Indian Band's Reserve. So that was kind of the whole situation. But immediately when we started to talk about this, we got castigated by Sean Carlton, who is a professor from the University of Manitoba, and Daniel Heath Justice, who is a professor from the University of British Columbia. They came out swinging, accused us of residential school denialism and all sorts of just ad hominem comments. At the time, I was being mobbed by my colleagues at Mount Royal University, and a number of colleagues were fomenting this ostracism of me, and that resulted in me being fired in December 2021. So there's a lot of things happening, and this whole thing about Kamloops is one of the reasons why I can't be reinstated, says the arbitrator, because people like Gabrielle Weaselhead, who is a person, I was fired and she was brought back in because she felt unsafe by the views that I was stating at Mount Royal. She feels unsafe, and it causes friction if I discuss the Kamloops case. Therefore, I cannot be reinstated at Mount Royal University. That's the argument that the arbitrator has accepted for my case at Mount Royal. So this is unbelievably serious. We are facing the destruction of tenure at universities, and very few professors seem to care about it. And my treacherous union, who was the one who got responsible for me largely getting fired, it's totally captured by these activists. So if Daniel Smith is listening to this podcast, we need a public inquiry about universities in Alberta to get to the bottom of the ideological capture of the whole system. And the Kamloops case is a way into that, because it's so obvious that this is just a factual claim. I'm not trying to make some complex political argument here. I'm just saying universities should value facts and the pursuit of truth. We used to agree about that, and now we don't anymore, because people like Gabrielle Weaselhead get very upset when you challenge their false ideas. That's what's going on.
So I want to go back to Kamloops in 1 second, but just so the claim is I feel unsafe or uncomfortable if Frances is at the university. Couldn't you put in the same claim? I feel unsafe having her maybe we both should be gone. I just feel unsafe with someone else having ideas.
Well, the problem is that it's not deployed equally. So we care about whether Gabrielle Weaselhead feels unsafe, but we don't care whether you would feel unsafe. Like Gabrielle Weaselhead is a prized indigenization asset. Everyone listens to her and worries about how she's feeling. You know, what can we do to make her feel that she is included? And in order to make her feel that she's included, we have to exclude everyone else from the university. The same goes on with trans activism. That's the other file that I've been involved with, because the trans activists feel unsafe when I say that there are only two sexes. That's my claim with respect to the trans issue. And because it makes Mary Lee Mulholland upset, I can't be reinstated. You know, this kind of thing. When like this claim about there being more than two sexes and so on, this is causing unbelievable carnage to children, because they're getting their body parts chopped off, getting cross-sex hormones. Their whole lives are going to be destroyed because they have a mental illness and believe that that's the reality. I couldn't say that when I was at Mount Royal. I could not. I would never raise the issue of mental illness about the trans issue, because I knew I would just be absolutely destroyed. But that is the truth. And instead of dealing with the mental illnesses of people, we are pretending that their mental illnesses are reality. This doesn't work.
On the two sexes thing, I don't know if I can speak for majority of people, because maybe I'm just wrong in that, and I should just. But I feel like a healthy dose of society knows there's only two sexes, and they think the rest of it is just kooky, and want to protect children. It's why, in my opinion, it's why Danielle Smith comes out, uses the Notwithstanding Act. It's why these things are happening, why she gets applauded for it. And the activist side of it, they're going to scream no matter. I mean, they get everything they want. They still scream for more. So, to me, that one, although it's still playing out in society, I feel like most of society, it's almost become a running joke, the two sexes thing. We're still seeing it propagate and pop up in different places. But I think most people are like, that makes no sense, right? Like, I mean, just look at, I don't know, I come from the farm, Francis, and the old joke,
See the animals.
Right. Just look at the animals. It's like, come on, like, let's get the old wheels running here. We're in strange territory. And it was before 2025 when that was all at its height. But I feel like, Donald Trump coming in, and people can hate Donald Trump, but lots of people on the left are like, that actually makes sense. Like, like the men competing against women in sports and seeing that play out has been, carnage, right? Like, it's just been awful to watch, and and it just goes on. And so I feel like that's hit a ridiculous peak where most of society just agrees with using the Notwithstanding clause, and there's certain activists or certain things that have been used against Danielle Smith here in Canada to try and make her look poorly on it. But if you talk to the general public, they're just like, that makes sense. Let's just carry on with their day. We don't need these things in school. We don't need all this, the chopping off of body parts. We don't need, we need parents to be involved. If I come back to Kamloops, if I come back to the First Nations, though.
But just to interrupt you on the trans issue, the universities, there's still a huge problem with this issue in the universities. My wonderful colleague, Sinclair McRae, a philosopher at Mount Royal University, he has been trying to pursue this issue, especially about the sports, the issue of having men who believe that they're women compete in women's sports. The whole university that's vocal is against his position. And I hope he does not get mobbed the same way that I got mobbed. This is very dangerous for truth-seeking professors in universities right now. And I do not know why the Alberta government is not taking more of a role. I can take street epistemology into all those universities and discuss these claims. I just need some help from the Alberta government to be able to do it. This is the situation now. We need the universities to be truth-seeking institutions, and on a number of issues, they are not. They are completely captured, and the trans issue is still a huge problem in universities.
Well, and once again, I guess I don't have children in university. I'm not in university, so I don't see that realm, I guess, Francis, right? So I take what you're saying very seriously, because I'm not in those realms, so I don't, I see the everyday Albertan, and it's just, I don't know, not a dead issue, but pretty much dead issue. Like, I don't mean it isn't still going on. Just in their lives, they're like, yeah, this is silliness. Like, what are we doing?
But it's a wider issue too. Although we have there's only two sexes, and the remains of 215 children have not been confirmed at Kamloops. Those are two claims that you cannot discuss at the university. So that's true. The fact that you cannot discuss them at the university is an indication of a much larger problem with the university. Yes, I would agree. And that's what has to be addressed by the government. And the government is reluctant to enter into this, but all it has to do is just start a public inquiry on this, or, give me some assistance in my attempts to restore the universities to become academic spaces. This has to happen if we want the universities to exist as academic institutions, which, not that long ago, 10 years ago, although they were never perfect, they were functioning. I was able to thrive in the university system up until about 2019. That's when it all started to fall apart.
You have to forgive me. Government intervention unnerves me. So
Me too.
When you're saying you need the government to do something with the universities,
Yep.
what can they do that you're like would make sense? You're talking about an inquiry, but like, what would that accomplish? Like, what government involvement in universities are you talking specifically about?
Well, there's two possibilities. One is to have a public inquiry, which will, because it's not just there's Lethbridge and Mount Royal University, those two things. Get those presidents and different people up giving testimony. You need to force these people to say what they think is the case in a court-like setting, or something where they're forced to say things, because what they do is they just hide behind a wall of bureaucratic and legal kinds of things.
Yeah, they just don't talk.
Yeah, we're still trying to get things to go with University of Lethbridge. That was 2023. We haven't gone to court yet on this. It's going to be 3 years, and it's probably going to be longer. And then there's going to be all sorts of legal obstacles. If you have a public inquiry, you can have much more openness, and we can look at the cases of University of Calgary. There's been terrible things that have happened there. University of Alberta, there's been terrible things that have happened there. So let's have a look at what's gone on, plus the Mount Royal case, which is mired in, obfuscation of the whole labor relations regime, which I've been gone through an unbelievably abusive process for the last 5 years. And it's never going to end, because I will not give 1/1000th of 1 inch on what's happened and how people, the administration and the union, colluded to have me removed from Mount Royal. Like, that's what happened, because they all favor the woke activists and so on. And that's never probably going to come out in the arbitration process, because it's all controlled by the union, so and the administration. So it's incredibly abusive. And if you have a public inquiry, you can have much more openness as to what you're looking at, and they can have access to all my documents. They can just take a look at those things. And then the other possibility, because I know that's going to be a very cumbersome process, is, create some kind of consultancy role or whatever, to bring in the Spectrum Street epistemology to all the universities in Alberta. Like, I don't know how you can do that, but you could, they have advisors of various kinds. Make me the advisor to restore critical thinking and open inquiry at universities. I can do it. I can touch base with all the presidents of the universities and say, we want to do this event of grit. We want to get the different sides of this issue. Everyone's going to be invited, and we can talk about the evidence that exists. Help out my poor colleague, Sinclair McRae, who is fighting a massive battle to discuss men who believe that they're women in women's sports. This is one of the things he's looking at. And he's getting no support from his well, there's people who support him, but they're obviously reluctant to come forward publicly, because they're going to get serious pushback from these ideologically driven trans activists.
Yeah, well, as I sit here and I'm like, it's settled, and I know that's a stupid thing to say, but I'm just, I guess the political climate for the trans, the men, women, that conversation has changed. But as I say that, here in Alberta, we just had the pastor arrested for not issuing an apology. And I'm like, oh man, So, like I'm almost putting my foot in my mouth as I say that, because obviously it isn't settled. I just look at, here in Canada, the whole men-women issue. I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong on this. I got to be very clear. I have no ear of anyone. I'm just my own thoughts, Francis, this morning. And I go to set up a public inquiry on that. I think there is a growing sentiment for that on that specific issue. I could see that. And I could see, like, let's open up some discussion on this. I could see that. But if I come all the way back to Kamloops,
Yep.
the reason I was trying to walk through all the things, when you start looking at it, is because the First Nations, the Indian Act, reconciliation, I mean, you got the Edmonton Oilers, not the only team, before every game. They have a land acknowledgement. And I point to them because I'm a hockey player. And I love the game of hockey. And I watch what's going on, not only there, but in every aspect of society, where it just is coming more and more and more. And that one is almost like it is settled. We're moving on. Francis, you're a thorn in our side. We want you nowhere near us. And we're going to send mobs. The cops don't show up because they're like, no, it's that Francis Widdowson again. And once again, I'm not talking to cops, folks. I'm just like, I'm watching it from afar, I guess. And on the specific issue of Kamloops, that one is, it's like it's been settled and we've moved on. We're not going to talk about this anymore. And yet, obviously, there's some problems there. You keep pointing them out.
Yes, and we must have truth about Kamloops. If we can't have truth about Kamloops, then the whole process of evidence-based reasoning is being destroyed. And this is, it's, as I repeat myself again, it seems like a minor issue. But when have we said before it's okay for people to lie to people? That's okay. We're okay with that. Lying to people is fine. I don't think people think that. Like, it's like, no, lying to people is not okay. So stop lying to people about Kamloops. Like, that's, and this is, UVic is lying to people about Kamloops.
What is UVic?
Winnipeg, I don't know if they've specifically kept
what is UVic? Sorry, what has UVic said specifically?
So they've been doing this for 4.5 years. Well, they have a president whose name is, she's acting, but she's not actually, she didn't start it all. It was a guy by the name of Kevin Hall. Anyway, he said initially a mass grave was found at Kamloops. So that's what he said. They had a sacred fire burn for 4 days about the bodies of children that were found at Kamloops. They got some banners printed up of 215 plus banners, which they put up all around campus. In September 2024, they claimed that because the banners were getting a bit weathered, the 215 plus with the 215 plus numbers on them, they were going to take them down and replace them with Aboriginal artwork. Now, perhaps they did that because they realized that this claim was no longer true and they wanted to just kind of, but they just continued to pretend that this was a valid thing. And they said this on their website, the 215 graves found at Kamloops in September 2024. And then they now have the survivors flag that they've raised, and then at this route, so this thing that happened at UVic on December 2nd, they had this all these professors got together and invited their activist friends, all dressed up in orange shirts and whatnot. And then they had this woman giving a talk. She's a poet laureate who said the 215 children who were buried at Kamloops, like she made this speech with that being part of her speech. And then they removed me. I was not allowed to be there with my billboard saying what remains 215. Like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the evidence. It was just a question. Like, are there the remains of 215 children at Kamloops? What's your evidence for that? And they would not allow that question to be asked. And the other thing too was that someone got up, a young person, and tried to say, hey, shouldn't we have a marketplace of ideas that we're discussing? And she was just quickly escorted away
Well,
by all these activists.
as soon as they saw, because they allowed her to speak for about 30 seconds, and as soon as she started to just say, isn't it a marketplace of idea, you could see about 3 of them go, oh, this is the wrong person. And off
we
they
don't
went.
want that. So, that's kind of where we're at here. Like that, people watching that at a university, you've got all these people with orange shirts and this frenzy of drumming and then you got someone who's saying, hey, why don't we just kind of look at some other ideas about this, or let's have some discussions. Oh no, we can't have that. Like that was in a nutshell what is going on. And are we okay with that? Is that okay to have universities that are propaganda factories and not places where you're trying to figure out what's true or false?
Well, it's supposed to be a place of open discussion, learning, of questioning pretty much everything, right? Like, I mean, you're supposed to be able to ask whatever you want. Yes. It's a very fundamental part of going to university, is that you're going to be, pushing on your critical thinking. You're supposed to write on what you believe in, and then, discuss it, debate it, all these things. And when you come back to, you think of what Charlie Kirk was doing, going around all the university campuses in the United States.
Yeah. But I'm not even doing what Charlie Kirk is doing. I'm just trying to ask people, like that's why Spectrum Street epistemology is so beautiful. Is it's not about I'm right and you're wrong, that kind of setup. It's about, okay, you have this claim. Let's figure out the evidence for that and how confident you are about it. And after you've had this discussion, are you going to be more confident about it? Or are you going to be less confident about it? Or are you going to stay the same? So it's like gradations of certainty, which is how you should never be 100% certain about anything. I'm not 100% certain about the Kamloops case. I think it's highly improbable that there's remains buried there, but it's possible. But there's no evidence that we have. So that's kind of the key is that you have degrees of certainty, and your degrees of certainty are based on evidence. And when you're presented with new evidence, you should change your view somewhat. Like that's how you should work in an academic context. But that is not how things are occurring in the universities. And I know it's bad. I've been watching it deteriorate for the last 30 years. And the funny thing is, I have my master's degree from the University of Victoria. I received a master's degree in political science in 1992. So I was there for 5 years at UVic. I got my bachelor's degree there as well. So I saw UVic in its glory days. Wonderful professors, a little bit of wokeism still was around the edges. Like there was a few kind of postmodernists, there is no truth kind of arguments going on, but it was just sort of seen as an interesting kind of thought that you could entertain. And I was never, ever told I should not say that, or we could not discuss that, or that never happened. And in fact, it was the opposite. I had a professor, I remember him, his name is Warren Magnuson. We kind of fell out, unfortunately, because he became a little bit woke. But at the time, he was a very, very critically thinking socialist. And he said, I challenge every student to take on my views. I suspect you don't accept my ideas, because, of course, most students are not, at that time, would not have been socialists. And we would just tell the professors what they wanted to hear to get good marks, right? Like that's kind of a bit of the strategy if you're a bit. And he said, don't do that. take me on. Like, I want you to take on my views. If he was actively encouraging people to do that. I remember that very, very clearly. And now, like, you're never going to get that. That's never going to happen. Well, Sinclair McRae does it. My wonderful colleague, Sinclair McRae, who I cannot praise enough. Like, the Alberta government should get him to be one of their consultants to help with Mount Royal University, to restore Mount Royal University to its wonderful status. When I arrived there in 2008, it was a wonderful institution. We had Robin Fisher as the provost and Manuel Merton as the dean. They protected me. They seriously protected me. And I could have been taken out much earlier. But they stood up and they said, no, we're an academic institution. And although Francis Widdowson has controversial views, that's what universities are all about. And they told people in no uncertain terms that's what was going to happen. Look at the change as to what's happened in the administration. You have, presidents openly, like not openly, secretly kind of collaborating with, activist students and so on. This is what you get out of the.
When you look at universities as a whole, and you go, this is when it started to change, and this is how it got there.
Yep.
Where do you point to? Because you're saying in 2008, if you weren't protected, you would have been out well before when you did.
Yep.
So what is it that started to happen? Is it just this kind of over time, a decade after decade, just kind of slow transition? Or is there something you point to specifically? You're like, that's when it started to happen, and this is the things that started to, spawn out of it.
So I know specifically when I realized we were in trouble, which was the fall of 2014. And that was when Kathy Shaler, the provost at the time, who was a new provost, so took over from Robin Fisher. She was absolutely horrible and an activist through and through, told Arts Faculty Council that we would be indigenizing Mount Royal University. And I was listening to this going, what is that? What does that mean? That does not sound like that is an academic stance. And then in December 2014, I was at a workshop, beware of the word workshop, put on by the Canadian Association of University Teachers, which was the organization created to protect academic freedom. And it was holding this equity workshop and telling people that they should be putting territorial land acknowledgements on their syllabus. And I thought, what on earth is the Canadian Association of University Teachers doing? Why would this wonderful organization that is there to protect academic freedom, why would it be actually advocating something which is a threat to academic freedom? And when I was participating in these two things, I was going, this seems very odd, but I didn't realize the extent of what was going to come. But just to give a wider historical lens on it, although it became apparent in 2014, the problem has been unfolding since the 1960s. So it started in the 1960s with postmodernism, which is the idea that there is no objective truth. The truth is the subjective beliefs of groups that perceive themselves to be oppressed, like that kind of idea. And that got put in place in Black studies, women's studies, queer studies, disability studies, etc. They're not academic programs, they're activist programs, and they were marginal for many years. And then starting in the 2000s, they began to take over the machinery of the institution through equity, diversity, and inclusion offices. That's when you started to see those offices begin to take root. That's when the administration became captured by these programs. And so now we have those activists running the institution. In Canada, they took over the unions. So that, for me, that's been a massive problem, is that my union, which is fighting my case, it got taken over by the activists. And so now I've got to rely on this activist entity to defend my job, and they didn't do a very good job of it. Let's just put it that way, because they wanted me to lose. And they set out to create a case that is so weak that it's not gonna win. So that's what they do, and it's just so heartbreaking that this has happened. But I'm still in the game. My case is being appealed to the Labor Relations Board. It was supposed to go on December 3rd, and then it got postponed because of some kind of medical emergency. And now it's going again on February 6th. So we're appealing my lack of reinstatement to the Alberta Labor Relations Board, but the whole system is so badly corroded, it's unlikely to succeed. But if we get the public inquiry, or like the division of the government helping Sinclair McRae and myself and all the academics who want to have an academic university, we need the government's help. We really seriously need it. And I know it's a difficult pill to swallow, because it should be academics who are deciding what happens in universities, not the government. But the activists have taken over the universities, so we don't have academics that are in charge anymore, and that's the problem.
Does the Peterson bill help you at all?
This is for professional
bodies,
associations. No, because we're not professional associations. We're a different kind of setup.
So this is something different than
Yeah, we're not supposed to be governed like professional associations. We're supposed to be academically run institutions that are not, the thing that governs us is our academic expertise. That's how we're supposed to function. But because everything has been so badly captured, we don't have that happening anymore. Especially in the humanities. The sciences are not as bad, but they're still bad. Like the biology departments. Like, that's why the trans thing has taken root, is because the biologists are not functioning properly in this debate. Like, biologists know there's only two sexes. They do. Like, this is what they study. Like, but they're not standing up, because we're going, oh. A few are. Richard Dawkins finally has started to do stuff. Jerry Coyne, another great guy. Luongo, she's from Brazil, I believe. Maria Luongo, she writes with Jerry Coyne. I met her in Stanford. Of course, Colin Wright, who got pushed out because of his stance on there's only two sexes. He got his career was destroyed. So it's like, what? A biologist has their career destroyed because they're arguing that there's only two sexes?
Where does it, in your mind, if let's say Francis just decided, you know what, I'm going to go, I don't care where your spot is. I don't know if it's Mexico or Hawaii or south of France. Take your pick. It doesn't matter. But let's just say you rode off in the sunset and you just said, you know what, I'm just tired of this. I don't feel like getting mobbed every second day. And you just decided this is going to go wherever it's going to go. In your mind, where does this go if it isn't stopped?
Fascism. Fascism is on the horizon. And people should study what Nazi Germany was like before fascism took hold. And the first thing that got it was freedom of speech. And interesting, Germany is a really good example because people often compare it to Mao's China and Russia, what happened in the Soviet Union. Those aren't really very good comparisons because the university system was not well established in those places. Germany had the most advanced university system in the world. And it got taken over by the Nazis, and they pushed out all the academics. Like, they took over the institution and turned it into a propaganda arm of the Nazi party. And that's where we're going. And I'm incredibly concerned about what's happening. And I don't, and everyone seems to be asleep, about it. And I'm saying we have to fight now. We are not being disappeared. We are not being put in, well, I was not put in jail. I was taken into an interview room and given a ticket for $115 just for being on a campus trying to discuss this claim about Kamloops. But the fact they arrested me is a new, this is a new thing. And, I'm going into 3 other universities in Vancouver in January. University of Fraser Valley, Simon Fraser University, and UBC, because they're all complicit in the Kamloops, deception. University of Fraser Valley has Sarah Bollier, who was the GPR operator, who was just a complete activist who was used by the band, or maybe she was in on it. I don't know what, but she doesn't know what she's doing. And she somehow gave the people the impression that children as young as 3 years old were buried in the apple orchard, or maybe the band was, I don't know what happened there, but I want to go and expose Sarah Bollier, University of Fraser Valley. Simon Fraser University, the archaeology department is under a gag order from the Kamloops Indian Band. How can that happen? Publicly funded institution that should be a safeguard against these false claims is actually participating in their continuation. And then we have the wonderful University of British Columbia with the First Nations House of Learning, Jolie Viveros, who's the head of that, actively perpetuating falsehoods, and Andrew Martindale, who is the supposedly an archaeologist who's been doing the GPR deception in Cooper Island and claiming that GPR finds, Jolie Viveros is saying that was on the UBC website, is that GPR detects human remains. This is not true. GPR is what the geoscience expert I've been interacting with says is a thing finder. That's what a GPR machine is, a thing
Anomalies.
finder. You have things that are there and you don't know what those things are. You have to dig. You have to excavate to find out.
Which comes back to the Kamloops thing with the 215, which I believe they've already corrected to 2. Didn't the new number become 214, or is it less than that? Anyways, it doesn't matter. The thing is, they found anomalies, but they've never dug. And then the proponents of you can't disturb that land, this is sacred, come in and go, you can't disturb it, so it's just we're not going to go find out. But they've never dug to see what's actually there. And if you were going to actually find human remains, you should probably dig it up, and you should probably find out what the anomalies are so everybody could know.
Exactly. And they received $12.1 million. They applied for this funding in, according to Blacklock's documents. I have 283 pages of redacted emails that were obtained by Blacklock's Freedom of Information. They applied for $9.3 million for excavations. That's on the application form. They got $12.1 million, and from the various piecing through all the documents, it appears that they got around $3.2 million between 2021 and 2023 to do the forensics and the DNA analysis on. But of course, in order to find out whether you've got to do DNA or forensics,
you got to dig.
You've got to excavate to find the remains, whether there's remains there or not. But they took that money. They haven't done it. That money has to be spent on the excavations. And they said in January 2022, there was a Fifth Estate supposed investigative documentary on the Kamloops case. And Manny Jules and Ted Gottfriedson Jr. said that the 13 family heads had met and had decided to, quote unquote, exhume the bodies so the children could be sent home. Now, of course, in order to exhume the bodies and send the children home, you have to find out whether there are bodies and children there. But they were going to do that. They said they were going to do that. And now, because they sense that this is not valid, this view, they're trying to back away from it. And they shouldn't be allowed to do that. It's not even a question of money. It's a question of deceiving the entire Canadian public. I don't know how many people, when they heard this announcement, believed that there were these children buried there. I was taking a distance on it.
In general, we could probably say a high proportion of Canadians.
High proportion.
Right.
And look at the hysteria. There's people crying. There was memorials all over the country. There was flags flown at half-mast.
There was churches burned.
Churches burned. If you're watching that, you're going to say, well, why? How could all these people be saying this if it weren't true? Like that's what they were saying. So, the whole thing needs a massive, truth-telling kind of process. Like, we need a truth and reconciliation process on the false claim that was stated in 2021.
In fairness, though, if they went and exhumed it and found 200 and some bodies, Francis would be sitting there going, oh, well, there they are.
Yeah. So, and then we can get to work on finding out who was responsible, who those children were, who was responsible for putting these children in clandestine graves. Like, who are the perpetrators? All the things that need to happen to hold people to account for the terrible crime that must have taken place for there to be. And I should say too, you mentioned the 200. That's important to bring up too. On July 15th, 2021, Sarah Bollier, the GPR operator from the University of Fraser Valley, she did a presentation, and she said that there were not 215. It had to be downgraded to 200 targets of interest, because she had gotten word from, I presume, the archaeology department at Simon Fraser, that 15 of those 215 targets of interest had been previously excavated by the Simon Fraser University archaeology department, and they had not found any remains when they were excavating that area. So that raises the question, if 15 of those 215 were false positives, why wouldn't the other 200 also be false positives? Likely the septic tiles that were buried in that location in the 1920s.
Well, welcome to part 2. I'm now joined by Francis Widdowson, Tom Flanagan. Tom, thanks for hopping on and joining us. Tom, I'm going to start with you before we continue today's discussion. Just first time on the podcast, maybe you could give the audience a little bit of who they're listening to.
Well, I'm a retired professor of political science at the University of Calgary. I taught there for, I think, 55 years. I published a number of books about Indigenous issues, both Métis and Indian. And I also had a side career in politics. I was worked at various times for Preston Manning, Stephen Harper, and Francis Widdowson. Excuse me, not Francis. Danielle Smith. I'm getting my women mixed up here.
Freudian slip.
Freudian slip. Yeah, worked for you. Yeah, maybe I'll get a chance to work for you too, Francis. For Danielle Smith. So I became a campaign manager. For not for Preston, but for the other two people. And so I was in and out of politics in the back rooms for about 15 or 20 years, which was a very interesting. I might get rid of my cat here. He's a senior cat. He's somewhat has dementia. He likes to be near his people. Yeah. So anyway, I did have a career in the back rooms of politics, but that's all in the past. But I'm happy to say that here in Alberta, the mayor, Jeremy Farkas, is a former student of mine. The premier, Danielle Smith, is a former student. And the leader of the opposition, Naheed Denshi, is a former student.
Wow.
So, teaching at a university, you get people of all types. So I had cordial relations with all of them. some closer than others.
Just on the provincial politics then for a second. With watching Naheed Nenshi be the leader of the opposition, Danielle Smith, obviously the premier of Alberta, those two interact and what is being said on both sides. Sitting in a classroom, Tom, you got to interact with these people when they're much younger. Seeing it play out now, do you have any thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because they were debating partners and opponents back when they were students. This was outside the classroom, but there was a debate club. And Danielle and Naheed were both active in the debate society. As far as being students, with Danielle, it was a small class, and I got to know her quite well. And she was a very good student, and I recommended her for an internship at the Fraser Institute. Naheed, I didn't get to know as well. He was in a large lecture, Introduction to Politics. I'd like to take credit for his achievements, but I don't think he learned it from me. I think he had a natural gift for it. So I knew him, but he sat in the front row and was interested. But because of the size of the class, I didn't really get to know him well. Bumped into him a couple of times later on. I remember one time I was giving a lecture at Harvard, and Naheed showed up in the lecture. I didn't even recognize him. He'd had his teeth fixed. It made him look quite different. Good way to get started in politics, make your appearance more presentable. So I can't claim to have known Naheed well. Just to say hello, really. Danielle, though, I did know quite well.
Well, from here on out, feel free, Francis, to hop in any point. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to Tom is you had an opinion piece in the National Post. Canada wasn't stolen from Indigenous people. I thought maybe you could walk. I'm going to assume a bunch of people have read it, but at the same token, I assume there's a bunch of people that haven't read it. So maybe you could walk us through, the piece and just parts of it. If you go far enough back, I guess what I kind of summarized, it's like, well, what point do you want to start where the settling started, and we're going to draw a line here, but not back here. Maybe you could walk us through some of your thoughts on your research or your opinions or your thoughts.
Yeah. First of all, to clarify, the titles of columns are always supplied by the newspaper. So they put on a catchy title, but our article didn't actually deal with if you want to argue about whether the land was stolen or not, in Canada, you have to bring in treaties. And we hardly mentioned treaties in our article. So we were going into another branch of the argument, which has to do with settlers and colonization. The article, I think, really started in Mark Milkey's mind as an attack against the term settler colonialism. And so he wanted to make the point that everybody's a settler. Homo sapiens didn't get to the Americas until quite a late date, maybe as late as 20,000 years ago, maybe 15, it's debated. And there have been waves of settlement, very different language groups among American Indians, and then the Inuit, and we don't know if some of these peoples survived to contribute to the gene pool or whether they were exterminated. I mean, for example, the earliest settlers 20 to 15,000 years ago probably came down along the Pacific coast and hopped. I mean, most of North America was covered by ice then. You couldn't settle in the interior until you got far south. So they probably hopped along the coast, and they got as far south. There's good evidence that they settled in Chile, although there's no human remains, but there's all kinds of other evidence of a settlement, not an agricultural settlement, but a gathering kind of hunting gathering settlement in Monteverde in Chile. So we have no idea who these people were, what race or language group, what happened to them, whether they were absorbed by later waves or exterminated at what, we don't know. So anyway, there are all these waves of settlement, and Europeans are another wave reaching the New World about the same time as the last wave of native peoples got there. The Inuit reached eastern Arctic region, including Greenland, about the same time as Columbus got to the Caribbean. The Vikings, in fact, were in Greenland before the Inuit. If you think of Greenland as a part of North America, Trump does, apparently. Yeah, we try to make this historical point that in a larger perspective, there are all kinds of waves of settlement, and we're a more recent one, but that doesn't mean that the earlier ones have special claims to make, because in their day they displaced other populations. And there's good records of First Nations in Canada driving out other First Nations or exterminating them in recent times. Like the Iroquois were building an empire in what's now on New York, Ontario, and the American Midwest at the time that French started to come up to St. Lawrence. So we can't be too moralistic about this. There's a succession of peoples, and we're a recent one, but we're all here, and let's get on with the show. I mean, that's the basic tenor of our article.
Well, I guess sitting here, it seems like we're trying to reconcile what we did in the last, like you look at the Cowichan Tribe decision in BC, and I think if I go back to Barry Kirkham's points on it, they have to prove ownership of the land before 1844, if my memory is correct. And we're very focused.
1846, I think it is. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes, we're very focused on making right the wrongs in recent history, and recent being 1846, right? And trying to usher in this. I don't know how to explain it, but I got two very smart, capable people here that maybe could break it down of what we're trying to do and what's so drastically wrong with this thought process.
Yeah, I'll say something, and then Francis probably wants to jump in too. And here we come to the other branch of the argument that we didn't deal with in the National Post article, and that's treaties. Canada was, although assertions are sometimes made about conquest, Canada wasn't really taken over by conquest. There were treaties recognizing the sovereignty of the Crown everywhere from Nova Scotia, the Maritime provinces, to through Alberta, the Prairie provinces. And by the treaties, First Nations surrendered their claim to ownership of the land. They recognized the sovereignty of the Crown, and in return they accepted smaller pieces of land for their own use and benefit, which today we call reserves. And that's what we called them at the time, reserves, and various benefits from the Crown, annual subsidies and certain guarantees. So it was a peaceful process. It was based on mutual agreement. Now, British Columbia is the big exception. There were few treaties in British Columbia. The government of British Columbia, which was before it became part of Canada, operated on a principle of the extinguishment of Aboriginal title through adverse possession. In other words, the representatives of the Crown, first it was the Hudson's Bay Company, and then it was a governor appointed by Britain. They operated on the principle that they had sovereignty and that they could allocate the land, and they did. And so they set up Indian reserves, and they also made grants of land to various settlers coming in. And you could say it was unilateral because it wasn't a treaty, but certainly there was consultation with the local native people. They asked them where they would like to. Here, I could hold my cat. It makes me look like Dr. Evil in the movie. But he gets upset if I ignore him for too long. So there was consultation, and they were asked where they would like to be. A lot of it revolved around fishing stations, certainly on the coast. and up some of the rivers far into the interior. Actually, people lived by fishing mainly of salmon, and they had special places where they could catch them. And so they asked for those places to be given to them as reserves. So there was consultation, and everybody at the time recognized the sovereignty of the crown. Or, well, I won't say everybody, maybe there were dissidents, but by and large, people on both sides recognized the sovereignty of the crown. So now you fast forward to modern times, and since the 1960s, there's been a movement in British Columbia to claim that Indians still have full ownership of the land, and some would even go further and say they have sovereignty, perhaps not fully understanding what that might mean. So this goes back to the eminent lawyer Tom Berger, who was the original litigator in the 1960s. There's a chain of cases. And then we get the government recognizing Aboriginal rights in 1982 in Section 35 of the amendments to the Constitution. Again, without understanding what they were doing, it was added at a late date to create a political coalition in support of patriation. The text says that we recognize existing Aboriginal rights. And then the courts come into it in a big way. And here, I got to get rid of something which suddenly popped up on my screen. The courts get into it in a big way and start expanding the notion of existing Aboriginal rights. But basically, they start ignoring the word existing and creating new rights. And the most recent decisions, you've probably had guests talking about them. The Richmond decision, which appears to nullify ordinary citizens' ownership of their houses in fee simple, and a recent other decision. I mean, it's getting very, very complicated. But anyway, it's been mostly a movement in the courts since the 1960s, but the politicians did enormous damage in 1982 when they adopted Section 35 without fully grasping what might be implied in that. And that gave the courts additional momentum. Now they had something new to work with. And anyway, why don't you let Francis join in?
Well, just before Francis hops in, Section 35, could you just walk the audience through what they adopted?
Well, there are several subclauses in it, but the main one for our purposes is just the statement at the beginning of the section that Canada recognizes existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Indians, Métis, and Inuit. The word existing was added at the insistence of Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed. So he basically kind of wanted to freeze it. He said, okay, Canada historically has recognized treaty rights for sure, and certain Aboriginal rights, and these are embedded in various statutes and legal decisions. Okay, so we recognize those, and we put them in the Constitution, which means they can't easily be overturned. It would require a constitutional amendment to rescind what's been done in the past. But the word existing was supposed to be a safeguard against the creation of future rights by the court, at a constitutional level. Future rights could be created by Parliament, but they wouldn't be part of the Constitution. But the word existing has been ignored by the courts, and they have amplified the notion of Aboriginal rights to include Aboriginal title, ownership of outright ownership of the land, which you get. And again, the main decisions have been in British Columbia because of the absence of formal treaties in most of the province. So it's easier there to argue that Aboriginal title is still existing. You can make an argument in some other parts of Canada too, like in Quebec or New Brunswick, based on the wording of 18th century treaties, which recognize the sovereignty of the Crown, but they don't explicitly deal with land. But it can be argued that it's implied, because in the British system, the sovereign is the underlying owner of all land. Your land, my land, Francis's land. The Crown has underlying title to everybody's land and can withdraw private ownership if it chooses, although compensation is required because of acts of legislatures. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what the question was.
Well, feel free to hop in. No. You're just adding in context. That's what I wanted. Francis, feel free.
Yeah, so I think that's great what Tom has done, because Tom has much more expertise on these legal questions than I do. But I think there's some serious conceptualization problems in everything that has happened since the 1960s. Because, of course, the 1960s was the break that we had, because we had originally in 1969 the idea that we had to sort of get rid of the outdated kinds of interactions that were sort of seeing Aboriginal people as wards of the state and so on. And there should be assistance to enable Aboriginal people to become Canadian citizens just like everyone else. So that was kind of the plan up until 69. And then after 1969, that got rejected. And everyone was very concerned. Well, it seemed to be the climate was we need Aboriginal people to kind of agree to whatever's going to happen, or the Aboriginal leadership. So there's always the leadership. It's not the ordinary Aboriginal people don't have very much to do with this. It's the leadership. The leadership were very upset about getting rid of all these Aboriginal kinds of special designations. And then we started to move on this other path, which Alan Cairns, who Tom and I knew quite well, who is a wonderful political scientist who wrote the book Citizens Plus, he said we embarked upon a parallelist type of path, which was we weren't going to try to bring Aboriginal people in as citizens. They were going to be seen as this separate society, and it was characterized in terms of this nation-to-nation relationship to Rowampum. And the whole legal context started to emerge within that kind of framework. So the idea is that you had these separate Aboriginal nations with their own kind of legal kind of framework that would exist side by side of like the Canadian kind of framework. And because it was, and this is going to get into some controversial ideas here, it was never recognized that Aboriginal groups were less developed, less culturally developed than modern societies. The whole framework didn't make any sense because it was assuming there was a similar level of development like Quebec. Like it was seen almost like the relationship between Quebec and the rest of Canada. So Quebec can become a state if it chooses to do so. So far, we've managed to have arrangements so that that doesn't happen. But if they wanted to become sovereign, they could become sovereign. That was how Aboriginal groups were seen. But Aboriginal groups are small, less productive, and less complex in that they don't have the kind of institutional development that you see in a province like Quebec. So they can never become states. They're going to be always kind of in some kind of dependency relationship with the Canadian state. And so we have been building this now for 50 years. And my argument is, and Albert Howard actually, so we developed this together, is that this was a strategy of a group of lawyers and consultants that, you know, kind of seized on these kind of legal ambiguities to create this infrastructure that doesn't make any sense and has been used to extract funding for the last 50 years. And it's getting more and more irrational and more and more expensive because we're trying to work with a framework which doesn't really make any sense. Sean, you need some follow-ups on that one. I'm not sure how much Tom agrees with me. I have read his book, First Nations Second Thoughts, very carefully, and I think we're in agreement on a lot of these matters. Of course, he would take the Adam Smith kind of theoretical kind of backing, and I would take the historical materialist theoretical backing. But the developmental question, I think we were in agreement on.
Yeah, Frances thinks she's a Marxist, but the truth
I
is not.
I don't agree with that. I don't accept that term because I'm an academic, so I look at it from a truthfulness kind of position,
Okay, so
not a political position.
She thinks she's a democratic socialist. Will you accept that label?
No, I'm a Orwellian socialist, and maybe a historical materialist is the theoretical framework.
Well, I was just going to say the funny part that all her friends now are conservatives.
No, I have some friends who are.
You still have some friends from
historical materialists, but they're not. They're generally quiet. They don't want to have the same treatment. They don't want to get the same treatment.
No, well, I can understand that. Anyway, but we conservatives are happy to support Frances.
I'm happy to. Anyone who wants to pursue the truth as in the objective sense of a common reality, I can sit down with anyone who has that position.
She's the sharp end of our spear. She'll go anywhere. Yeah. Anyway, why don't you ask some questions, Sean?
Yes.
Well, I'm just okay, so we sit here in 2025, okay? You go, you can see it playing out, this parallel, I think that's the word you used, Francis, of these two parallel societies. You got, I don't know, you just got every day, and then you got this one side by side that wants to be a nation within a nation. We have, just all the things playing out in society right now. I was saying to Francis earlier, Tom, you go to an Oilers game, heck, you watch it on the TV. What happens? A land acknowledgement. And it's being taught everywhere, and there's this guilt that's being seeded into society that we're all just awful human beings forever to have moved to Canada and taken over land that was theirs, and on and on. And it takes away some of the historical context. And so you sit here in 2025, and I watch Francis go to different universities and get absolutely mobbed, and I'm like, this is something, and yet it's this two-tracked. We have one narrative, and that is what has been done in the past is awful, and that by even bringing up any conversation around it becomes denialism. I'm probably oversimplifying that. No. And I don't know if there's a question in there other than that is what I see here in 2025.
No, I think it's correct. I think the promotion of guilt is an important part of the strategy, and land acknowledgements do that. But another part we haven't talked about yet is the claims about Indian residential schools to make Canadians feel terribly guilty about the way that Indian children were treated at the residential schools, and the extreme claims that bodies of dead children have been found, which they haven't. No bodies have been found anywhere. But these claims, which are usually repeated in the legacy media without any scrutiny, are essential to fostering this sense of guilt. And so, if I can start making a bit of a plug, Francis and I and others have published 2 books on this subject. The first is called Grave Error, and the second is called Dead Wrong, and they're both available only on Amazon, and they are both Amazon bestsellers. I checked this morning, and they maintain a list on First Nations in Canada books about them, and Dead Wrong is number 1 and Grave Error is number 2 among the 100 top bestsellers about First Nations in Canada. So there is a hunger in the Canadian public to get straight information. And Grave Error, which was published 2 years ago, has now sold over 25,000 copies, which for Canada is extraordinary. I mean, this is a book with 800 footnotes. It's not it's not light reading. It's written by a combination of retired professors and lawyers mainly, and journalists. It's not easy reading, but it's been selling, and now Dead Wrong which brings the story up to carry on. First, Grave Error was published in 2023, and then Dead Wrong carries the story up in the 2 years subsequent to that. So we're doing what we can to combat the sense of guilt. We're pointing out there's really nothing for Canadians. Well, let me rephrase that. The residential schools, there were 143 of them. They existed for more than a century. Large numbers of students went there at various times. I'm sure that bad things happened. I mean, they do in all boarding schools all over the world. George Orwell has written about his experience in boarding school in England. So I'm not here to defend everything that happened in every boarding school every year, but as a system, I can't see a better option. And it wasn't compulsory. More Indian children went to day schools on reserves than went to the boarding schools. Parents had to apply for it. And up until about 1990, it was generally considered a kind of a premium form of education for Indian children. But it's maintained by as Francis talks about the leadership, it's maintained by these people, constantly elaborated on, to promote a sense of guilt in the larger population. Well, it does two things. It promotes the sense of grievance among Indians, makes them more willing to support their leadership initiatives, to turn out in mobs to beat up people like Francis. But then it also, on the larger canvas, it promotes a sense of guilt among the rest of the population, and makes them feel that they have an obligation to support First Nations in a lavish way. I was looking at the main estimates for next year. The way I read the math, the government expects to spend about $42 billion on Indigenous peoples. Mostly that's on First Nations on reserves. There are some programs for Métis and Inuit and so on, but the largest 90% of that is for First Nations. I mean, that's a lot of money even today. I mean, it's probably more than we spend on the Canadian forces. I haven't checked that amount in the main estimates, but so now my wife is wandering in. It's
Never a dull moment in Tom's house.
Never a dull moment here. Yeah. So anyway, again, I've forgotten what the question was. I just start riffing on it,
Well, you started to point out how much money has been going that way, and you said one thing
Guilt.
there that, I was asking about guilt, but it's interesting because I've definitely read some different books on it. Now you've rattled off two that are on the bestsellers list, and I'm going to assume there's been a whole bunch of people on this audience that have read them, and if they haven't, it'd probably behoove them to go pick it up, heavy reading or not. Because it'd be interesting to, get some facts, because when you get a narrative said over and over and over again, and you question said narrative, in today's climate, Francis is literally living out the climate of today, which is to shut down any conversation surrounding it. You mentioned that, one of the things that is not often told is that parents of Indian kids had to apply for it. I don't know if once again, I'm just a layperson, folks. I don't know if I'd heard that. I thought it was, some of the stories I've been told is that they rounded up kids and off they went. And it's never that it was parents trying to get them a better education or anything like that.
Yeah. No, you had to apply, parents, sometimes there were no parents, orphans or abused and neglected children. So sometimes it was a guardian. But there had to be the responsible person had to apply. Admission had to be approved. Sometimes it wasn't approved because the school was full. Those applications are in government records. Many of them are easily available online today. You could go read them. And as I say, only a minority of students ever went to the residential schools. It was mostly, the big numbers were in the west and in the north, where small populations over large distances made day schools impractical. In the east, in Ontario and Quebec particularly, or the Maritimes, more students went to day schools, but there were some in the west as well, depended on the situation. This notion of rounding up, it has, I think the basis in historical fact is that for remote communities, the practical way to get the kids to residential school was to transport them in a group. So, for example, a bus would go out to a remote reserve if it had a road that was passable, and would collect the kids who were going. They didn't just go out and grab kids, but the kids whose parents had applied for residential school would be put together in a group and taken back. Now, did the children fully understand this? I mean, some of them were only 7 years old. They may not have understood that their parents had applied for it. They may have thought that authority was taking them away from their families, but the reality was that the parents had applied for it, and they were being transported in a group. It could be by bus. In more modern times, sometimes it was by plane for very remote northern reserves. Sometimes it was by train. For example, almost all the schools were religious, either Catholic or Protestant. So you had, to take an example, you had Protestant parents on the West Coast who wanted their children to go to a Protestant Protestant residential school. But there weren't very many in BC. There was a handful on the coast, but they tended to be full. And also there were denominational differences between the Anglicans and United Church. So parents would say, okay, I want my children to go to the United Church residential school in Edmonton. And then they would be taken in a group from Prince Rupert, let's say, by train. And there would be, a group of 10 or 12, who knows exactly. And they would travel as a group with supervision and be picked up in Edmonton and taken out to the residential school there. So there were, different things happened which have given rise to this legend that children were, basically kidnapped and taken to the schools. But that's completely false. But it is true that students were sometimes transported in groups as a practical way of getting them there.
And sometimes, as Tom did mention, the only case where there was possibly intervention by the RCMP or that kind of action would be if there was some word of the state, kind of like apprehension of children who were living in neglected homes. There's a very interesting CBC documentary that was done in 1991 on the Williams Lake School. And this was before the CBC had become completely captured by activism and doesn't have objective standards anymore with respect to examining Aboriginal issues. Anyway, there was one woman who was interviewed who was saying that she found that the residential schools were a place of safety because there was so much drunkenness and violence in her home that she was not safe being at home. So those kinds of cases you can see, because you see it now, where you've got a mother who is not fit to be a mother, and you're trying to apprehend the children, and the mother is fighting tooth and nail to keep the children. So I can imagine those kinds of scenarios taking place. As well, I wanted to just ask, because I'm not sure in terms of these remote communities, because it was, I believe the wording was you had to attend a residential school if there was not a day school that was available in your community. So in terms of that mandatory character, when there was no day school, Tom, maybe you could, were there applications that still had to be made, or because there was no real alternative that people had?
Yeah, yes, there were still applications required.
Okay.
That amendment to the law wasn't passed until 1920. So prior to 1920, there was no compulsion at all to attend a residential school, or any school in practice. After 1920, the law said that you had to attend a residential school if there was no day school available, but it wasn't systematically enforced. And actually, there was a shocking number of young kids, Indian kids, who never went to any school whatsoever. I'm not saying it was never enforced, but it wasn't enforced systematically. And yes, and parental, or the equivalent of a parental application, some kind of guardian had to apply for placement in a residential school, and the child had to be accepted if there was space available. And then after that point, here we get into the notion of perhaps of missing children and unmarked graves. Every child received a number, as is true in all residential schools in the world everywhere. And the child was very carefully tracked both by the school and by the federal government, because the funding of the schools was on a capitation basis, a per capita grant for each for student. The money didn't go to the student, but based on the number of students, the school received a federal grant. So the school didn't want to be losing students. I mean, sometimes students withdrew. The parents had the right to take the students out, and that happened. But the school kept track of students because they needed the numbers for their grants. At the other end, the federal government kept track because they didn't want to be paying for students who weren't there anymore or who had never come. And they didn't want to be paying for white or Métis kids who sometimes got into the schools, even though by legislation the schools were only for Indians. But particularly in remote areas, a lot where you had small numbers of white and Métis people, they often saw the residential school as the best available alternative. That's what happened with Senator Gladstone, the first Indian senator. He was from the Blood Reservation, but he was born Métis or white, depending on how you want to count the background. But there wasn't any school available where the remote part, the frontier where his parents lived. And so his grandfather, who was a Scotsman, arranged for him to attend the residential school. Now, I can't remember exactly how they worked out the payment, but they did. It's all in Hugh Dempsey's biography of Senator Gladstone. All the details are there. And Gladstone liked it, and he learned to speak the Blackfoot language, and he married an Indian girl from the school. And eventually, after a long time, he became an Indian himself. Although there was quite a bit of opposition, Indian men often didn't like the idea of non-Indians joining. But eventually they accepted him, and he became a local leader, and eventually appointed to the Senate. And a big advocate for residential schools in their day. By the late 1940s, Senator Gladstone thought that the time had come for some other model, but he and his family supported he sent all his kids to the same residential school. So anyway, again, I've kind of forgotten what the question was. But
I just wanted to bring up something that Tom mentioned, because this is a constant source of confusion that is perpetrated by academics like Sean Carlton from the University of Manitoba, which is the question of missing children and bodies found, what is being talked about when that is mentioned, and this is something that was in the TRC report, and there was a report done by, I can't remember his name, but he did a report for the TRC on this, missing burials. Anyway, it is the cemeteries. It's the question of cemeteries. So cemeteries exist in association with the residential schools sometimes as part of a wider parish, where children from the residential school who died of usually tuberculosis is buried. And what happens is that the markers for those burials existed initially, but they were made of wood, and so they deteriorated, and then they're no longer in existence. And if you look at the Kamloops Indian Band Cemetery, which is across from the Catholic Church, you'll see the kind of the disrepair. The cemetery has fallen into disrepair. So there's children buried there, but people don't know exactly where those children are buried because the markers don't exist. And that issue of not knowing exactly where children are buried is confused with the claim that there's these clandestine burials. So there's no evidence of clandestine burials at this time. No evidence of a child being murdered and put in a grave that was secret. What's being talked about is the parents not knowing exactly what plot of land. We have Romeo Saganash, who was an MP. His brother died at a residential school in Moose Factory, was buried in the cemetery there, yet his mother did not know exactly what area of the cemetery he was buried in, and this was found, through research and so on. Tanya Talaga, who wrote the book The Knowing, her relative Annie, I think it was her grandmother, was at an asylum and was buried in a cemetery that now has become just a grassy patch next to the Gardner Expressway. And through research, Tanya Talaga was able to find where that grassy patch was, and her family traveled there to do a ceremony on that grassy patch. But although those are maybe issues that need to be resolved, they're not the same as saying that children were murdered and buried in secret graves. And Kimberly Murray, the special interlocutor who is doing this quote unquote missing children kind of, examination, she actually said in 2023, in I believe a parliamentary hearing, that the children aren't missing. They're buried in cemeteries. And so that really needs to be understood. So, saying where are the bodies and no bodies have been found, this is not exactly accurate, because there are bodies, but they're buried in cemeteries, and no one should be surprised to find human remains in a cemetery.
Francis has expressed this very, very well. There's nothing I can add.
Well, if I just get to where we are today, and you got Cowichan. So you have this fee simple title dispute, and you can see how it's spreading across Canada, and for sure BC. Right now you have the city of Kamloops, correct? And then you have New Brunswick, where they're putting claim to 60% of New Brunswick. And you go, like, where does this end? Like at what point can we just open this up and be like, we are going down, like, insane territory was probably 50 years ago. Where we're at today, I think I sit here and I go, well, what's gonna stop? Yeah, everybody. It was Barry Kirkham, the lawyer, and people can go back and listen to that, who talked about, like, it shouldn't happen in Alberta and Saskatchewan because they have treaties and on and on. I'm like, yeah, but if it's already happening in BC and they're already doing things that they normally wouldn't do in law, what's going to stop this from coming into every other province? Because they can make the case that it was signed under duress or something along those lines. And I think a ton of people in Canada are very uncomfortable with the notion of fee simple title being I don't know what the word is. You two probably have a better word than I will. And then, you go further, any criticism or any discussion around 215 graves or anything to do with this, if it isn't on the one side of the equation, the other side is just told to shut up and not show up. And you go, okay, but where does this take us to in the next 10 years? I mean, you two probably talked, discussed, written books on the history of it. But when you look at where we're sitting at today and where this is going, do you see where this eventually just ends? First Nations just own everything. They're the new power to be, and we just pay allegiance to that, and you're okay, and we just move on with life? Or is there something that I don't know, can shake people out of this? Like, are we going to talk about this, or aren't we going to talk about this?
Yeah. Well, I think the objective of many elements of the First Nation, not everybody, but many elements in the First Nations leadership would like to expand this as far as they can so that they can extract payments. They become the new landlords, and instead of paying taxes to the various instrumentalities of the Crown, provincial government, school boards, etc., you would pay tax to the First Nation. I suspect that's what they have in mind. There is an off-ramp here, which hasn't yet been used. I think it's staring us in the face. The Supreme Court of Canada, in several decisions, including the landmark Chilcotin decision on Aboriginal title, developed the doctrine of justifiable infringement. It didn't say that Aboriginal title is indefeasible, to use the legal term. It said that under certain circumstances, the Crown can infringe Aboriginal title. So that could include granting mining permits or pipeline right-of-ways, or it could include housing for tens of millions of Canadians. The BC lawyers did not argue justifiable infringement, as far as I know, in the Cowichan case. BC has a long record of incompetent advocacy in the courts, but probably don't have time to go into that. But this is another example of BC not using what I think would be the most applicable doctrine sitting there. It's already there. You don't have to develop it new. It's already there. The Supreme Court's black letter law. Yeah. So you would argue that the granting of title for fee simple title for homes is a justifiable infringement in a country like Canada, which has 42 million people who have to live somewhere, so we're gonna defend what has happened in the past. That leaves open the possibility of negotiating new agreements where they haven't existed in the past, but it would foreclose the possibility of First Nations trying to take over existing land titles and either displace the people. I don't know if they would go that far. The backlash would be enormous, but there's already a political backlash. But I think at least for now, the goal is probably to grab a share of revenue, either by getting the provincial government to pay them something, or by becoming a tax collector in their own right. Anyway, I'm not a lawyer, so lawyers can argue this, but from my reading of the past cases, I think that this notion of justifiable infringement of Aboriginal title is a viable one and could be used as a defense, but the BC government didn't use it.
Yeah, and in the meantime, Tom, there's going to be more claims made. You go on the economic corridor route, with what Danielle Smith and the MOU, of we're gonna have a pipeline go through BC. Well, now we have to bring in First Nations to approve it, along with BC, along with the federal government, and you go sitting here as just a regular Canadian. I go, so nothing's going to get done, and in the meantime, they're going to have fee simple title come into effect of where they are going to have ownership of it. People won't be able to sell their houses, won't be able to do any of that. Like the if there was ever a lack of trust in Canadian society, it's growing. And if you're an economic, investor, you want to invest in a country and see projects built, that's going to be, it's already grinding to a halt if it is at a complete stop.
Yeah.
And you go, like, where does this take us?
Yeah.
And it takes us into a poorer country, and they can become the landowner. But I mean, if nobody comes here to put in capital investment other than the federal government giving word service that we're going to have these things, but they're going to say on the other side, we're not going to approve them. We're in this stalemate of nothing happening and nobody wanting to come here and invest in it.
Well, what's required, like I say, the legal doctrine exists, but you have to have governments, both federal and provincial, who are willing to use the legal resources. In an earlier life, I had a career as an expert witness in litigation, half a dozen cases. I was hired by provincial or federal lawyers working for the Crown in both treaty and Aboriginal rights cases. And at that time, and I'm talking about the 80s, 90s, there were Crown lawyers who would play hardball, and they would use the doctrines that were there. And they won every case that I was on. I would like to take credit, but I just played a small role. But my point is that they played hardball and normal legal tactics and so on, and they won. But certainly since the Liberals came to power in 2015, Crown lawyers have been instructed not to play hardball. Yeah. There's a practice directive from Jody Wilson-Raybould,
yeah,
who instructed the Department of Justice to seek a settlement by negotiation rather than litigation.
Yeah.
So the federal government has been largely passive in Aboriginal litigation. They're negotiating huge, costly settlements and also giving away jurisdictional capacity as well as money. To change that, you've got to change the government. There has to be a government that understands what's going on and is willing to use the resources of the Crown. These battles are winnable. You're talking about a small element of Canadian population. They claim to be 1.9 million, but that's an exaggeration. That includes a lot of people who just have an element of Aboriginal ancestry, but aren't really part of anything.
And that's where you get into the cultural shift that has happened. There's a couple of huge problems that are much deeper than just a change in government. The first is the capturing of the legal profession and to some extent the judiciary, which has been happening. And Alan Cairns pointed this out in his book, Citizens Plus. There's a really good section on the Aboriginal industry's role in the legal profession and the law schools, the judiciary. So a judge is going to have to decide on it. The Supreme Court, if you've been watching, the packing of the Supreme Court with the what's called wokeism, which is identity politics that has become totalitarian, is very disturbing. And then there is this whole territorial land acknowledgement guilt tripping that's going on. This has made Canadians reluctant to assert arguments in defense of equality for all in Canada, and that they should accept lesser status because they are these horrible racist colonialists and they deserve everything they get, like this kind of thing, which is like nonsense. Mm-hmm. We should all see ourselves as being part of the same system that we're fighting for to create a better world for everyone. And Aboriginal people, the ordinary Aboriginal person, is going to be the worst off because of what's going to happen. This idea of Aboriginal leaders collecting revenue, they're going to keep it for themselves. And then the tax base is going to be depleted, which is going to be what's going to be funding the marginalized Aboriginal segment. So it's just a terrible system that has been unfolding for the last 50 years, and people have got to wake up and realize that they are being manipulated. Compassion for the terrible conditions of Aboriginal people is being used to have this authoritarian type of momentum, which is increasing, rapidly increasing. Look at British Columbia. And one final thing I'll say is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That has been put into British Columbia law. That is one of the worst developments that's ever happened in British Columbia's history. And we are just beginning to get a taste of what's going to be happening because of that legislation, which needs to be immediately repealed.
Yeah. Well, and Francis is right. It's not a purely political problem. As a cultural shift is required. But government can play a role in a cultural shift. It can appoint different judges if it can find them, better ones. It can cut off funding to groups that are spreading malevolent doctrines. It can set a good example in its own conduct. So, as a political scientist, I say start with government. But, cultural shift is important. And here we are. We're talking to the Canadian Joe Rogan. Maybe we will have some effect upon the culture as well.
Well, I appreciate that compliment. Either way, thank you both for giving me some time this morning and doing this. And Francis for giving us some extended time. Normally I'd air these as two separate, but they'll be put together. I think they the conversations blend well together. And thank you both for giving me some time this morning.
It's been a pleasure.